In 1836, in a farmhouse outside Chillicothe, Ohio, a girl was put to bed. She did not rise the next morning. She did not rise the morning after. Days pressed into years, and years into decades, and still she remained, lying as if the body had chosen silence, while time chose to continue without her. The physician who first examined her in that year wrote one line, no embellishment, no diagnosis, not responsive, yet still alive. And then he underlined it, as though even he could not accept the words without reinforcement. The family called her Rachel. The neighbors called her cursed. The ledger at the county office where births and deaths were recorded called her something else, not concluded. That was the paradox. The pages that measured beginnings and endings left her line unresolved. They would not close her entry, because no one could agree what had ended. A girl who neither grew nor passed, suspended in a bed that became less a place of rest than a reliquary of doubt. It is said that the room was never dark, though no lamp was lit. That her breath came so faintly it fogged no glass. That her eyelids, when brushed with a finger, resisted neither open nor shut, but seemed to hover at the threshold of waking and sleeping, as if she had been misplaced between states. Witnesses disagreed on whether she aged. Some said her hair silvered. Others swore it did not lengthen at all, that the braid laid across her shoulder was the same length in 1836 as in 1856. The body was constant. The telling was not. Such contradictions call old myths to the surface. In Appalachian folklore, a sleeper who lies too long is not merely resting. They are keeping a bargain. Some said she was a changeling, a child stolen by the hidden folk and left in a husk that breathed without waking. Others said she was an omen, that as long as she lay unmoving, the soil of Ohio would not be rid of its fever, its floods, its wars. A sleeping sentinel, unwilling or unable to rise, but still exerting weight on the land around her. We have no proof of such myths, only that the documents themselves betray unease. The census of 1840 listed her, but with a stroke through her age. In 1850, her name appeared again, with a note beside it, still confined. By 1860, the enumerator hesitated and left her line blank, only to circle it later with a faint pencil, as if even erasure could not be permitted. Numbers that should advance, 10 years, 20, 30, remained suspended. The census counted others. It stalled on her. The house itself remembered. The bed frame bowed with her weight, but never broke. The plaster above her pillow cracked in the outline of a human head, though no motion caused it. Visitors described an odorless air, as if breath was absent. The silence was described again and again, too deep, too stable. And yet, in that silence, there was always the sound of counting, not hers, not spoken, but in the tick of the mantel clock, in the scraping of pens in the clerk's office, in the tally marks neighbors kept when they whispered, 40 years, and still not risen. We open this file with her because she unsettles the boundary of what it means to live and what it means to be kept. She is not gone, but she is not returned. Not compatible with the rules of time. Not aligned with the categories of medicine. Not assigned a conclusion. And above all, not allowed to end. This is not a short story, and it will not rush. Tonight we open the drawer, sit with the paper, and trace 40 years of sleep that refuse to conclude. You are welcome to stay, to rest, to let the story unfold slowly around you. Subscribe if you have not already. These files are long, and you will need company on the way through them. And if you are listening now, tell me your country and the time. There is comfort in knowing we are scattered across the world, joined by the same forgotten case of a girl who closed her eyes in 1836 and did not open them for 40 years. The house in Ohio was not remarkable. A low-roofed farmhouse with clapboard siding, shutters that closed against prairie storms, and a single upstairs room whose window faced a cornfield. But when you enter through paper, when you read the intake slips, the marginalia, the census marks, you notice that the room has more presence than the house around it. The desk in the corner was not hers, yet every record of her seemed to circle back to it, as though the wood itself became the archive. Oak rubbed smooth where a clerk's wrist once leaned. ink stains in grooves that no polish could erase. A candle stub affixed to the surface, wax hardened like a second seal. Step closer, and you can almost feel it, the place itself refusing to forget. The edge of the table matches the arc of a hand that leaned too many times in hesitation. The ledger, bound in calfskin, still carries a smell of damp wool and coal smoke. The paper fibers fray not from mishandling but from an insistence that too many fingers traced the same line over 40 years. One name, one date, suspended like a fly inside amber, touched until it became more fragile than anything else on the page. Across from the desk sat the bed. Iron frame, simple joints, tightened once and never disassembled. The mattress was horsehair, flattened until it seemed sculpted around the shape of her body. Family members spoke of smoothing the sheets, though she never moved. They lifted her to change the linens, but the indentation never left. It was as if the bed itself had learned her weight, had accepted that she would not rise, and had shaped itself around her long presence. The quilt grew thin. Patches stitched by generations of hands could not disguise the original blue fabric, worn to near translucence where it covered her chest. There was a smell in the room, though visitors disagreed on its nature. Some said it smelled of lilac, faint and dry, though no flowers were kept near. Others insisted there was no smell at all, which was stranger still, because all rooms have a smell: wood, dust, cloth, or the sweat of life. To notice nothing is to notice too much. The absence itself was a presence, described again and again by doctors who made the journey to Ohio only to leave unsettled. On the wall above her head hung a calendar. In photographs it appears faint, ink washed from sun and time. Yet what unsettles most is that the calendar was not advanced. The pages were left to hang at 1836. The first year she lay down. Family members said it was a superstition, that advancing the calendar would force her to end, so they left it. The girl's body stretched across 4 decades of years, while the room's wall insisted on one, not 1837, not 1848, not 1865. Just the first year, pinned forever, shadowing the bed like a stopped clock. Neighbors visited, and they wrote of the silence. Not silence of death, not even silence of sleep, but silence that pressed against the ears. Some claimed that if you listened long enough, you could hear her pulse in the boards, the bed frame, the rafters. Not her own pulse, but the house's imitation of one. Others denied this, insisting instead that her presence dulled the very air, as if sound itself chose not to exist around her. 2 versions, neither more comforting than the other. Too much presence, or too little. In both cases, a system refusing to behave naturally. To stand in that room was to feel that you were entering a story older than the farmhouse, older than Ohio. In Scandinavian folktales, they speak of sleepers who guard the land, maidens who close their eyes for 100 years until disturbed. In Irish traditions, a changeling might be left in a cradle, unmoving, to test whether a family would keep it or cast it out. In the southern Appalachians, they whispered of the long rest, when a body refused to rise because it carried the burden of more than itself. Rachel became all of these at once, an American girl caught in European superstitions, her room the stage on which they overlapped. And still, when you return to the papers, you find something even stranger. The clerk's hand that copied her name onto the 1840 census had pressed more deeply into the page than any other line. Under raking light, the dent is visible, heavier than ink. The same happens in 1850, though a different hand had written it. Different clerks, same hesitation. The material world, paper, wood, bed, seemed to register her more forcefully than words could. Even silence recorded her. We slow here, because the room itself is a kind of witness. Its table holds grooves of wrists that could not reconcile what they wrote. Its bed holds an indentation that refused to vanish. Its calendar holds a year that never turned. These are not myths told after the fact. They are surfaces and objects that refuse to let her absence of action be mistaken for absence of life. They remembered, even when the doctors could not agree, even when the family stopped speaking aloud of hope. The farmhouse is gone now, but the room remains in fragments. A ledger, a bed frame in a museum's basement, a calendar page pressed into a scrapbook. These fragments are not compatible with each other, not aligned across time, not assigned a single meaning. But all of them whisper the same line: she was still there. What unsettled the clerks most was not the girl herself, but the way the documents resisted closure. A bed can bow, a quilt can fray, a calendar can freeze, but paper is supposed to yield. Paper is meant to obey the pen. And yet, whenever her name was entered, something in the fiber pushed back. In 1840, the letters of her name bled faintly at the edges, as if the pulp did not wish to receive them. In 1850, the enumerator left her line blank at first, only to return with a lighter graphite. So faint it seemed more intention than record. In 1860 her name was written, but her age was left as a dash. Dash, not zero. Dash, not blank. A symbol that is neither absence nor presence. A refusal of category. Visitors to the room remarked on this too, though they did not use such language. They said the girl seemed not asleep but paused, as though a hand had frozen her mid-breath and would not resume. Some swore her chest rose, others argued it did not. One physician, in a letter to the Ohio State Medical Journal, wrote that her pulse was intermittent but not absent, like a clock that ticks in another room. Another, a skeptic, insisted that the family was deceiving themselves, that she was long gone and only superstition kept them feeding a corpse. But his visit lasted only minutes. He did not sit long enough to notice what others noticed, that the air itself thickened, that silence pressed, that nothing in the room behaved as it should. Folklore crept into the cracks where science faltered. Among German immigrants in Ohio, there were stories of the schlafende kind, the sleeping child whose spirit wandered, leaving the body behind until it returned decades later. Irish settlers compared her to bride sleep, a girl kept dreaming until the land itself was ready to wake. Even the Shawnee, though records are scarce, were said to whisper of the one who dreams too long. Whether these tales reached the farmhouse or not, the family bore the weight of them. Rachel's mother, in a surviving letter to her sister, wrote that she feared moving the bed because the house would not follow. A strange phrase, but one that tells us she felt the room itself had adapted, that to disturb its order would be to unmoor the fragile balance keeping her daughter alive. The locus of all this was not the girl alone, but the convergence of desk, bed, wall, and ledger. Each object was forced to carry meaning it had not been built to bear. The desk became archive, the bed became reliquary, the calendar became metronome, the ledger became scripture. They were no longer furniture or tools. They were witnesses. Witnesses that did not speak, but that remembered. A groove deeper than others, a stain that refused to fade, a line that resisted ink, all of it a testimony that the system of time and record-keeping could not easily absorb a girl who chose or was chosen to sleep for 40 years. If you visit the archives today, you can still see it. Not her. Her body is gone. No one knows where it was buried. But the page from 1840 with her name struck through. The pencil that tried and failed to erase. The calendar page, browned with age, glued into a scrapbook. Fragments. Detached, scattered, stored in different counties, different collections. Yet they echo each other, each one saying the same line in its own way. She was still there. The first record that speaks of her directly is dated May 14, 1836, in the Ross County Physician's Log. A plain ledger, ruled with neat columns. Name, age, condition, outcome. In the row where her name should have been written, the clerk hesitated. His pen begins a capital R, then falters. The ink spreads wider at that moment, as if his hand paused too long, and what follows is not a full name but an abbreviation. Rach. No more. No line for age. No line for outcome. Only a remark in the final column. Not responsive, yet still alive. It should have been straightforward. Patients admitted, treated, discharged, or deceased. Yet here was a line with no conclusion, a diagnosis without treatment, a life without continuation. The ledger was meant to close each entry as neatly as the page itself, but hers would not close. And it happens again. In the county census of 1840, her household is listed. Father, mother, 2 sons, and then another mark, a daughter. Her name written lightly in pencil, not ink, as though whoever copied it in did not trust permanence. Her age is noted as 4 years younger than reality. She was born in 1820. The record marks her as 16. But even stranger, a faint stroke appears across that number, almost like the start of a 2, as if the clerk's hand remembered the next decade, but was not allowed to finish it. A number started, then abandoned. A hesitation in the fibers themselves. Documents are supposed to be still. Yet here they behave like witnesses with failing memories, saying too much in one breath, too little in the next. A smudge on one page is echoed by an erasure on another. A missing age becomes a stroke of graphite that never turns into a number. It is as if the record itself could not decide whether to keep her or let her vanish. We turn again to the physician's log. By 1845, another entry appears, though she had never left her bed. Condition unchanged. The words are written in a different hand, less steady, ink that feathers at the edges. But what unsettles most is the column meant for date of outcome. Across her line, instead of a blank, the clerk wrote a dash. That same dash again, the same refusal to conclude. Dash, not 0. Dash, not end. A stroke of the pen that says, still suspended. And so a pattern begins to form. Each document, intended to close, opens instead. Each record, intended to count, refuses to count her properly. Numbers falter. Ages are struck through. Ink runs wide. Folklore tells us that names are never stable in such cases. A changeling's true name cannot be written. A revenant returns with its age unchanged. A girl who sleeps 40 years can never be assigned to a single number, because numbers mean growth and she does not grow. To write her name is to admit contradiction, so the pen resists. To record her age is to confess impossibility, so the graphite mutates. The Ohio Historical Society preserves a fragment of an 1850 census page. Her household again. But here her name has been written, then erased, then circled faintly, almost like an afterthought, as though the enumerator tried to deny her, but the paper itself pulled her back. You can still see the indentation under raking light. Her name pressed deeper than the others, resisting erasure. Names that survive erasure do not simply record identity, they declare it. And yet the contradictions do not end with names and numbers. In one church register, her baptismal line is copied over again in 1842, though the original was written 2 decades earlier. Why re-enter it? Why copy the same ritual into a new book, unless someone needed her to exist in fresh ink, to remain valid? The hand that copied her entry even shifted the date slightly. 1820 became 1822, an error perhaps, or perhaps another way of dislocating her, keeping her from aligning with herself. The deeper we go into the documents, the more they act not as mirrors of truth, but as agents of distortion. One clerk abbreviates, another erases, a third copies with error. But all of them, in their mistakes, repeat the same paradox. She does not advance. She does not conclude. She remains. And this is where myth and archive blur. Numbers that mutate are like names in fairy tales, stable enough to convince, unstable enough to haunt. In Grimm's tales, the wrong name gives power. In Appalachian whispers, the wrong count invites the dead. In Ohio's records, the wrong age preserves a girl who does not age. The clerks did not know it, but by miscounting, by miswriting, they gave her longevity in the only way a ledger can, by refusing to resolve her. Her record in 1860 speaks even louder. Her line is written in a hand more careful than the rest, the name full this time, Rachel M., but beside it the word confined. Not alive, not ill, not even present. Just confined. As if the state itself had accepted that her existence was not biological, but administrative. She existed only in confinement, and to write that word was to both include and exclude her. Not compatible with the census, but not discarded. Suspended once more between categories. The first record is never just a line. It is the first fracture, the first refusal of closure. And her first record is not a diagnosis or a death, but a hesitation. A name unfinished, an age struck through, a dash where an end should be. The record contradicts itself, and in that contradiction, she survives. We find the second record not in a county book, but in a small journal kept with flour-dusted hands. The cover is unmarked. Inside, the first date is April 1836. Recipes copied in a narrow hand. Bread, preserves, soap. And then, between the instructions for lye and fat, a line that does not belong with the others. She went to bed and did not rise. The entries belong to Miriam, Rachel's older sister by 3 years, who wrote in a cadence more practical than poetic. She lists the chores, wash Monday, mend Tuesday, and then under a day with no chores listed, a paragraph turned into a prayer. If we lift her, she breathes harder. If we sing, she does not stir. If we leave the door open, the room grows colder. It reads less like a diary and more like someone trying to hold a household together with lines. Miriam's journal never names a diagnosis. Instead, it counts. The first week she counts minutes. The first month she counts days. By winter she counts seasons by the shape of the shawl she lays across Rachel's chest. Pattern worn to the rise, she writes. Then, a recipe again, as if by writing she can stitch the world back to order. On a later page the lines shorten, stanza-like, as if breath itself were rationed. Morning, pulse, noon, still, night, no change. The page after is torn clean, not ragged. The kind of removal that suggests someone needed to keep a part of their grief unrecorded. We do not place heavy weight on the language of a sister. We note it, and we hold it next to another voice. A deposition taken in 1841 by Elijah S., a justice of the peace who traveled farm to document disputes and, on occasion, anomalies. He visited to confirm whether a household still harbored a living member who could not be moved, for reasons of taxation and church tithe. His document begins with a formula. On the 14th day of October in the 41st year of our Lord, I, Elijah S., did attend at the residence of. He records distances in paces, heats the wax for his seal. With the same candle the family uses for prayer, writes down the names as he hears them. Then his language slips. I considered the girl deceased, he writes, but felt the warmth of the chest, and the pulse at the neck. He notes the bed's indentation, the stillness of the lids, the absence of decay, the coolness without damp. Skin cold, not clammy. He asks the mother whether they have sought a physician. They have. He asks whether they have measured time. They show him the calendar that does not turn. He records the phrase, puzzled, held to first year. Beside this, in the margin, a single word appears that we will see again, in other hands, confined. Between Miriam and Elijah, a chorus emerges. The lines are not in harmony, but they repeat. Stanza, seal, and stamp. Miriam counts minutes and seasons. Elijah counts paces and signs. Her diary drifts into prayer. His deposition drifts into hesitancy. Both refuse the finality that a clerk's book would demand. A third voice arrives in a letter that should not be in any official archive at all. It is a condolence letter addressed to Miriam, dated 1843, written in a neighbor's hand that leans forward like a person eager to be done with bad news. I saw the quiet one at the fence, the neighbor writes, and this is the first time we hear the phrase by which she will be known in a dozen side accounts. The quiet one. She walked your garden row like a shadow, and when I called she did not turn. The letter has no further elaboration. It pivots into weather and the price of seed. But the sentence stands. A neighbor saw a form in the garden. Was it a figure, a fear, a dusk trick? We cannot prove it. But the letter exists, and its writer believed her own eyes enough to send it across 2 fields and a creek. The letter moves like folklore, grafted to a rootstock of condolence, ritual language, then a seed of a story. We are careful here. We treat it not as evidence of a walking sleeper, but as a record of how the community needed to make sense of a girl who would not rise and would not end. A thing that won't conclude grows a shadow. A person held in a room makes copies in the minds of those who cannot reconcile the room with their seasons. Back in the diary, Miriam notes a Sabbath when a visiting pastor read a verse that no one recognized. Romans 35, he said, and the room bowed their heads. There is no Romans 35, the Bible stops earlier. But his voice carried such command that the family followed, and he pronounced obedience over the bed like folding a sheet. Smooth, quiet, final. Hold the fold, someone wrote later in the margin. Perhaps Miriam herself, perhaps an aunt. The phrase will not explain Rachel's condition, but it will explain a practice. Hold her as she is. Do not unfold the time that would demand she change. Elijah returns in 1847, summoned by a cousin who wants the tithes reduced. Again he records. Again he presses his seal. Again he hesitates. I listened for sound, he writes, and heard only the clock. He asks whether they have advanced the calendar. They have not. He asks whether she takes broth. She does. He asks whether she has spoken, and here the page holds a smear, as if his pen paused long enough for a blot to form. He writes, no words, breath present. Deposition language should not read like a diary. Yet his does. He is not a physician. He is a recorder. But even recorders have to decide what to do with time when time misbehaves. He decides to keep the case open by keeping his sentences open. No periods at the end of his lines for her, commas, dashes, and that dash that appears wherever an outcome should be. Another neighbor writes to a cousin. They still keep her upstairs. Sometimes we hear a hum, like bees, but there are no bees. We do not include the hum in any diagnosis. We place it where it belongs, among the sounds people give to silence when silence frightens them. In the same letter, the neighbor adds, almost grudgingly, the boys carried her to the window last spring to look on the planting. They say her eyes did not open, yet they felt watched. If this is true, it tells us only that a family tried to include a daughter in the season, even if season could not include her. Silence is a system's perfect ward. An unresponsive body causes no scandal, no revolt, no complaint that cannot be filed under patience and prayer. Administrations like quiet rooms. Donations prefer tranquil wards. A girl who sleeps for 40 years costs less in words than in remedies. This is how systems love stillness, by finding in it a way to keep counting without running into the cost of change. The phrase confined begins to migrate. It appears not only in Elijah's margin, but in the church tithe book. One confined, no attendance required. It appears in the school's list when they assess district literacy. One confined, not for ward use. Not for ward use. This is a phrase we have seen elsewhere in other institutions, stamped on bottles that never reach patients, on rooms renamed storage. Here, it marks a human being. Not for ward use. A line that turns a person into a problem for planning. Language does the folding here, not law, and with each repetition the fold becomes a fact. We return to Miriam's hand when Rachel's hair begins to silver, or seems to. Miriam writes, the braid is lighter, the child is not. We do not know whether hair whitened or whether lamplight altered color, but the sentence teaches us the grammar of the house. The braid can change, the child cannot. In that grammar, the past and the present meet and make a tense that has no name. On a winter page, Miriam's voice sharpens. Elijah says the paper can carry us if we carry the paper. She means, if they keep the documents correct, taxes, tithe, school, they are permitted to continue as a household without the pressure of removing what cannot be moved. Paper becomes passport. Ledger becomes ration. The bureaucracy learns to keep her by naming her confined. Not compatible with the categories, but kept within them by inventing a corner where she fits, a cell called still. And yet, in the very year the family seems to reconcile with that language, a visitor from the city leaves a note. He is a physician. He writes in a bag-bound notebook, body temperature cooler than expected, skin cold, not clammy, pupils stable, non-reactive to heat or brightness, responds to pressure, no shiver, no apparent sleep cycle. Clinical lines, and then, a sentence that doesn't belong. She blinks in order. We do not know what he counted, lids fluttering to some pattern, or the clock's mischief reflected in an eye that catches light. But in order is a phrase that belongs to stamps and forms, not to eyelids. Even medicine folds toward administration when faced with paradox. The body is read like a ledger. The ledger is read like a body. As the years settle around the bed like dust, the three voices, Miriam, Elijah, the neighbor, hardly speak to one another, yet they align. The diary gives the daily, the deposition gives the official, the letter gives the folk. Together they build a corridor between the room and the county office where time moves differently. On the room's wall, the calendar remains 1836. In the county book, the years parade past, 1840, 1850, 1860. Between them, a girl who neither advances nor concludes, held in place by words that begin to function like incantations. Confined, not for ward use. Still. Repeat a word long enough, and it hardens into architecture. If there is a contradiction that confirms, rather than dissolves, it arrives in a final note at the back of Miriam's journal. The entry is undated. It is only 3 lines, cramped near the binding as if she wished to hide them in the spine. Winter again. We moved the bed 1 hand to the east. The room resisted. The candle guttered though there was no wind. We do not take rooms that resist as evidence of anything beyond grief worn into wood, but we recognize the pattern. Objects acting like witnesses, surfaces remembering, language hardening into policy. The diary becomes stanza, the deposition becomes margin, the condolence becomes folklore. And in that triad, the system finds the perfect shape to hold an anomaly without naming it. Keep her. Name her. Don't let her end. What remains after these voices is not clarity but a path. From kitchen to bed to desk to county book and back again, the story repeats without closing, which is why when we turn the page toward the tests, the ways people tried to force the matter into proof, we do so gently. The room has spoken in wood and wax. The neighbors have spoken in shadows and seasons. The clerk has spoken in dashes. The next voice will be light itself, thrown across a photograph that should behave like any other, and refuses, darkening, then returning, as if it too were keeping to the house's rule. Remain, not conclude. By the 1860s, the family no longer asked physicians to cure her. They asked them to prove her. They needed the record, the seal, the official note that she was alive, even if she did not wake. And so the case shifted from medicine to measurement. The body became an object of test, not treatment. The first attempt came with light. In 1862, a photographer from Columbus brought his cabinet camera to the farmhouse. He insisted that a likeness would settle the matter. If the plate took her image, she must be present. He placed her by the window, curtains drawn half back, a quilt tucked carefully across her shoulders. The exposure was long, 3 full minutes. The family stood still, holding their breath as if to share the effort with her. The plate, when developed, showed her face pale but perfect. No blur, no drift. Only the eyes unsettled the operator. He wrote in his notes, lids uncertain. In the final print, the eyes seemed neither closed nor open, but held between states, as though the shutter caught a moment the body never moved into or out of. Years later, the photograph was tested again under ultraviolet light. The control photo, taken of her mother in the same sitting, faded at the edges, the silver yellowing with time. Her image did something else. The photograph darkened, swallowing the light, then returned to its original pallor, as if no exposure had touched it. The technician wrote reluctantly, the words that appear nowhere else in the archive. Image unchanged. Impossible. Photograph's age. Silver eats itself. But hers rehearsed the act of time without accepting it, like a sleeper who stirs but does not wake. The second test was chemical. A county doctor applied the iron gall reagent used to confirm authentic signatures. On the receipts and slips from the household, the reagent behaved as expected, blooming brown where ink had bound to the fibers. On the page that listed her name, the reaction refused. Instead of browning, the solution shifted. Blue at first, then red, then nothing. as though the paper drank the attempt and returned it colorless. The doctor wrote, not in his professional hand, but in a hurried margin, "Not iron gall." He did not try again. He closed the book and left the reagent bottle uncorked on the table, as if even the air should dilute his experiment. A minor forensic bead appears in soot. The bed was moved once, during a renovation, and the wall behind it revealed a strange detail. On the plaster, beneath a layer of varnish, clung a film of soot. Not above the varnish, not smeared by lamp smoke after the fact, but trapped beneath, as if the soot had entered the plaster, been sealed over and yet continued to emerge. A mason noted it in his inspection. Black breath under varnish. It should not happen. Time layers forward, not backward. Yet here was a wall remembering fire it had never seen. The objects acted as if they rehearsed what had not occurred. A photograph that aged and then unaged. A page that drank color and returned blank. A wall that remembered soot before soot touched it. None of this proves anything. But each test leaves residue, and residue tells us more than diagnosis. Diagnosis closes, residue lingers. Folklore again supplies its metaphors. In stories from the Black Forest, a revenant's likeness cannot be painted. The brush resists. In Irish tales, a changeling cannot be baptized without the water clouding in the font. In Appalachian superstition, a sleeper who has bargained with time cannot be photographed without the plate remembering something other than the moment. What we see in Ohio is not the myth itself, but the rhyme of it. Documents and objects refusing ordinary behavior when pressed to confirm a life that refused ordinary years. One technician in frustration wrote a line we cannot ignore. He had tested the photograph under UV 3 times. Each time it darkened, each time it returned. He wrote, "As though still being rendered." Rendered. His word, not ours. The language of image, of light fixed to plate. But also the language of bodies, of flesh and spirit. To say she is still being rendered is to say she is not complete. That her image, her life, is ongoing, unfinalized, waiting for a command that has not come. The residue of these tests is not certainty, but hesitation. Each time, the impossible result is written down only to be abandoned. Image unchanged, not iron gall. Black breath under varnish. No one pursues further. No one repeats. Because to repeat is to risk confirmation, and confirmation demands conclusion. Easier to leave it in suspension like her body in the bed. And so we place the forensic beside the folklore and see the same shape. The changeling refuses baptism. The revenant refuses portraiture. The Ohio girl refuses closure. The systems that tested her, light, ink, soot, all rehearsed the act of conclusion but did not conclude. They darkened, then returned. They bloomed, then vanished. They breathed, then sealed. Not compatible with science. Not aligned with expectation. Not assigned a category. Not allowed to end. After the tests, the language begins to repeat. Not in poetry, not in prayer, but in the stock phrases of offices that prefer stillness to decision. We lay 3 papers side by side, different years, different hands, different purposes, and hear the same sentence trying on new clothes until it becomes a rule. The first is a slim return slip from the county infirmary, folio 12, dated March 1853. Someone, likely the father, had inquired whether a long-term ward might lift the burden from the farmhouse. The slip is pre-printed, boxes to be ticked with neat X's. Admit, decline, observe. In the space where admit should have found its mark, the clerk instead strikes a diagonal through all 3 and writes, in a crabbed apologetic hand, "Not compatible with ward plan." Compatible, an engineer's word, a mechanic's word. Hired for a human problem. Beneath it, a second line, smaller, return to family. The card is thin. The pressure of that second sentence dents the wood of the desk through the paper. Decisions that leave marks deeper than ink. A decade later, the census of 1860 provides a margin note we have seen before, but not in this exact phrasing. Beside Rachel's full name, written carefully this time, not abbreviated, the enumerator adds, not aligned. He means not aligned with the schedule of age and occupation, the grid that makes a county know itself at a glance. The phrase looks lonely on the page, a single foreign word among numbers, but its loneliness gives it power. It is the first time the county admits what the family has known since 1836. She refuses the arithmetic of the year. The third paper is a court memo, docket B-19, dated 1864, concerning a petition for tax relief on the household due to one confined, long term. Across the face of the memo, stamped twice in faint violet, appears, "Still processing." The first stamp is straight. The second leans, as if the clerk's hand had grown tired of repeating the same delay and allowed the wrist to slacken. Still processing. Hold without ending. Continue without arriving. It is the sentence a machine would write if a machine could be kind. We turn these three phrases into a small chant. Not compatible, not aligned, still processing. They recur elsewhere, hiding in other rooms of the archive. The school board's roster for 1866 strikes through her name and adds not assigned. A physician's visiting book from 1868 leaves the outcome column blank and adds a pinprick mark where others receive a period. In the index, someone has traced in pencil what the pen refused to do in ink and whispers almost sheepishly not allowed to end. No one writes the sentence whole. The archive assembles it from fragments, like a riddle that the county answers by refusing to speak aloud. When language repeats across surfaces, it begins to behave like folklore. Words taught to close a file instead open a corridor. In the village tales, 3 repetitions settle a charm. In the county books, 3 stamps settle a practice. Say not compatible enough times, and a girl becomes an exception you can budget. Say not aligned, and her age will remain a dash you can account for without embarrassment. Say still processing, and the file never falls from the active shelf. It is not that officials believed in spells. It is that bureaucracy discovered what spells have always known. Repetition makes reality. We test the margins the way we tested the photograph. Under raking light, the faintest strokes come forward. On the infirmary slip, the word compatible sits over an erasure. Beneath it, the lampblack shows what the clerk first began to write. Admissible. He changed his mind. Admissible makes room for mercy. Compatible moves the matter to machinery. On the census page, the not aligned rides on top of a ghost curve. The enumerator had begun the gentle U of unemployed, then stopped, as if the pen remembered the poorhouse's categories before the mind remembered the bed upstairs. On the docket memo, the second still processing overlays a scuff that reads, "If you squint, pending review." The first phrase says there will be a decision. The second says there does not have to be one. We find echoes beyond the obvious offices. In the church tithe ledger, the sexton's hand adds to the household line. Attendance waived, confined. A school supply list scrawls not for ward use on a parcel of slates set aside for the infirmary. Beside it, smaller, 1 slate left at house. Still. A roadwork assessment notes the father's absence on ditch clearing day and excuses it with a symbol used elsewhere for cattle spent in winter, a circle notched to show loss. In the margin, the assessor leans his stub pencil and writes as though to remind himself why he has drawn mercy. Households one who does not move. Mercy becomes notation. Notation becomes architecture. The phrases begin to cross-pollinate. A clerk at the poorhouse in 1869 writes not assigned on a shelf card that should carry a bed number. The same clerk appears to moonlight copying depositions for the justice, and in that work the same hand makes the same curved enen in not allowed, but now it faces a different noun, not allowed to end. The words are never set in capitals. They never earn a seal. Yet they function as seals, holding a state that neither advances nor dissolves. We can point to the ways these phrases travel. They move by habit more than by policy. An apprentice learns how his master resolves discomfort. A sexton copies a phrase because it fit once and may fit again. A clerk stamps the delay because the desk holds the stamp and the stamp holds the desk. This is how an institution acquires its quiet decisions, not by proclamation, but by hand memory. We take one long breath and imagine the room while these refrains are written. The calendar still says 1836. The quilt still thins at the chest. The bed frame still bears her shape. A new visitor arrives with a form in his pocket and a sentence in his head. He does not enter with malice. He enters with procedure. Procedure says, align the person with the schedule. When the person does not align, write not aligned. Procedure says, assign the bed to the ward. When the bed will not move because the body will not move, write not assigned. Procedure says, process outcomes. When the outcome refuses, stamp still processing, then set the file where files that refuse go, a living drawer. We drift sideways to folklore because folklore has already drifted into the room. In old stories, a threshold word opens or closes a world. Open, sesame, speak, friend, and enter. Here the threshold words are secular and stamped, but their effect feels the same. They open a hallway between the house and the office where time behaves like slow water. Everything else flows around the phrase. The crop years flow. The brothers marry and move. The county lines adjust. The phrasing holds, and because it holds, the body is permitted to remain as it is without either cure or burial. There are numbers to count even here. In the infirmary register, the words not compatible appear 3 times in a span of 5 folios, 12, 14, 16, always in the same corner, always in the same slant. In the census book, not aligned appears on 4 households in 1860, but only Rachel's line carries the additional dash in the age column. In the docket, still processing repeats on docket B19, B21, and B23, the odd numbers all belong to cases that would embarrass the county if closed. Numbers that move get questioned. Numbers that hold get paid. We do not accuse. We describe the mechanism by which benign language learned to do administrative harm, and harm learned to look like care. A lesser echo emerges in the household receipts. A dry goods bill from 1867 is stamped approved after delivery. We see the same stamp in the infirmary pantry log, used to account for bread loaves that arrived by wagon when the ledger had already closed for the month. The county learns to accept what comes late without revising the book. The household becomes a loaf that arrives outside time. The stamp wanders from pantry to person and back again, and once language can serve both bread and bodies, it becomes the house style for everyone's convenience. We hold the 3 original papers again, the return slip, the census page, the court memo. They do not agree on purpose. They agree on tone. Gentle refusal. Administrative patience. The kind of patience that looks compassionate until you notice it never risks conclusion. We can forgive a family for hoping language could cradle a daughter. We cannot ignore that language also cradled a budget, a reputation, a calm report to donors who counted tranquility as virtue. It would be easier if one villain owned the phrases, a superintendent, a judge, a pastor. But incantations that endure rarely have a single mouth. They live in many because they answer many needs. Not compatible lets the infirmary remain orderly. Not aligned lets the census remain legible. Still processing lets the court remain humane without deciding. Together they form a room as surely as the bed and the calendar do. You can walk into it with a form in your hand and find exactly where to place the stamp. We step back from the desk, and the trio of papers remains, humming with the low voltage of repeated words. We have not learned a new fact about Rachel's body. We have learned a great deal about how bodies become files and files become furniture. The refrain now has weight. It can be measured in dents and stamps and the angle of a tired clerk's wrist. When we proceed to the next turn, the one where we stop listening to the phrases and look at the machinery they move, we will not be chasing shadows. We will be tracing a system that found a way to keep her by never finishing her, and found in that unfinishedness a comfort it could sell to itself as order. We kept thinking the story lived in a bed and a calendar, but it does not. It lives in a desk, in drawers, in minutes written to reassure men who never visited the room. The more paper we lay out, the more the paradox looks less like a miracle and more like a decision that renews itself. Not a plot exactly, plots require an author, but a comfort the county learned to prefer. Start with the way a case stays alive on paper. Docket B19 receives a violet still processing stamp. B21 gets the same. B23 too. 3 odd-numbered files spaced like fence posts down a field, all bearing a mark that lets budgets count activity without admitting lack of outcome. In the infirmary's annual digest, 10 pages, ink that runs fat where the clerk's nib wore. An entry reads, "Observations ongoing, quiet wards maintained. Quiet wards maintained." You can hear the sentence smile to donors. An active book looks industrious. A quiet ward looks humane. Between the two, there is room for a body that neither dies nor recovers, held as proof that the institution is both busy and calm. The mechanism is simple. If you declare something under observation, you do not have to pay for what a decision would cost. Observation consumes time instead of funds, paper instead of beds. Rachel becomes a unit of observation, a renewable justification to keep a line in the ledger. The infirmary's shelf card that should have read a bed number reads, "Not assigned." The county's docket that should have closed reads still. A machine that avoids friction by circulating the same oil. There is a second mechanism, as old as philanthropy, tranquility as currency. Donor ledgers show tours scheduled after harvest, when men could travel without losing daylight wages. They came to see order. They paid for it. Minutes from an 1865 board meeting carry phrases that preen. No disturbances reported. Visitors remark upon the peace of the upper ward. Music permitted on Sundays for morale. Nowhere do they account for silence that isn't peace. A girl who does not cry, does not speak, does not move, poses as an advertisement for care. The ward reads as gentle because the bed reads as still. When a system discovers that stillness reassures the people who finance it, it learns to purchase stillness with language. Listen to how the vocabulary migrates. Compatible starts on the return slip. Not compatible with ward plan, and wanders into board minutes where it has no business. Compatible with quarterly aims. Aligned sits in the census and then reappears in a supply memorandum. Provisions aligned to present occupancy, as if to remind the pantry that people exist exactly as the column says they do. Not forward use stamps a box of slates, then appears beside a human name. Words that were meant to move objects from shelf to shelf are promoted to govern flesh. Once that happens, the person becomes a setting. Confined is no longer a condition. It's a room. Count the incentives. A quiet ward draws gifts. An active docket draws appropriations. A stable census draws praise from the state. Every mechanism rewards the appearance of holding steady. The family learns the lesson too. If the paperwork is kept immaculate, tithes annotated, receipts pinned, visits signed, they are permitted to keep their daughter as she is. Elijah says the paper can carry us if we carry the paper, Miriam wrote. And she was right. The county discovers the same truth from the other end. If the paper can carry the girl, the ward can remain quiet. Everyone wins, except the part of the world that wants endings. We watch a small word get invented because it is useful. Compatibility is not a term of care, it is a term of machinery. But in the infirmary, S1853 slip, it becomes a life word, not compatible with ward plan. It does a kind of violence without raising its voice. It moves the situation from, "Can we care?" to "Does it fit?" And once fit replaces care, refusal looks neutral, even wise. A desk can perform this trick all day long. A bed cannot. There are other gears you only see when you stand at the edge of two books and watch them turn together. In the school board ledger, the household's tax is softened with a small mark beside literacy, the same circle with notch used to forgive cattle lost in winter. It is mercy, but it is also arithmetic. In the pantry book, approved after delivery stamps a line about loaves that arrived when the month was already closed. The same stamp appears on the household's dry goods receipt. A stamp that forgives lateness in bread learns to forgive lateness in bodies. Paper architecture heals itself by normalizing exception until exception becomes design. What the system cannot change, it names. What it names, it can store. The church's list writes attendance waived, confined. The court's memo stamps still processing. The census writes not aligned. The infirmary writes not assigned. Read them together, and you have an instruction set for keeping a human on a shelf. Shelf is metaphor. Shelf is practice. The return slip literally returns her to a wooden shelf called home. The line grows so practiced it stops needing ink. An apprentice clerk watches a master hesitate in the same places. Hand memory makes policy. We can watch money thread itself through gentler nouns. In the county treasurer's annual, a paragraph to the side of the columns, small, self-satisfied, notes that accommodations remained tranquil with nominal outlay for special care. Nominal outlay. Special care. The words caress themselves. They hide the fact that special care here means not changing anything. A body in a bed becomes a line that does not demand new figures. Harmony between budget and conscience is purchased by a phrase we have now heard too many times. Hold until observation. It appears on a shelf card. It appears in a minute. It appears in a diary after the pastor says a chapter that doesn't exist. Doctrine teaches patience. Policy harvests it. When the system works, you barely notice the edges where it rubs against the human. But there are moments when the paper squeals. See the infirmary clerk begin to write admissible and change to compatible. He blushed on the page. See the enumerator start unemployed and then write not aligned. He felt the word catch in his wrist. See the second still processing lean as his hand slackened. Tiredness is an index of a harm that thinks itself kind. Compassion should fatigue a person because of effort. This fatigue comes from repetition. We do not accuse a man at a desk of malice. We indicate the shape of a machine that blesses him for not deciding. Even the pastor's nonsense verse, Romans 35, performs administrative labor. It instructs the room to obey by folding. Hold the fold. Once the fold is doctrine, the ledger can use it without shame. Fold the year. The calendar stays pinned. Fold the bed. The shape remains. Fold the case. The stamps never expire. Ask what the system gets for keeping her unresolved. It gets time that looks orderly. It gets rooms that impress donors. It gets ledgers that behave. It gets a story it can tell about mercy that never has to absorb the cost of cure or the scandal of death. Ask what the family gets. They get permission. They get exemption from the ditch on certain days. They get the right to continue the ritual, broth, linens, calendar, that tells them they have not abandoned her. Ask what she gets, and there is only a sentence we can't finish. It would be a relief to find one line where someone admits the arrangement. But systems are better than people at not speaking plainly. Instead, the admission hides in the way phrases propagate. Not compatible becomes a door you do not have to open. Not aligned becomes a number you do not have to carry. Still processing becomes a future you do not have to enter. Repeat the words until the drawer closes by itself and still somehow remains open. If you need a myth to hang this on, choose the old story of a changeling left in a cradle. The parents suspect, the neighbors advise, the priest arrives with water. In one version, the child is not a demon nor a fairy, but something the village has made by believing the right phrases in the right order. That is what the county did. It made its own changeling. Not born, not buried, only filed. A person turned into a setting by the vocabulary of care. She is no longer Rachel in the books. She is confined. She is still. She is an adjective. Adjectives cannot ask to be ended. We hang a single line over the desk to remind ourselves what we are watching. A file draws a person. The person cannot redraw the file. By the time the words have done their work, the drawer has learned to close on her without ever closing. The ward has learned to be quiet by practicing the sentence that keeps her so. The budget has learned to look merciful by paying for paper instead of change. We are not in the room with a mystery anymore. We are in a room with a system that forgot how to forget. And because it forgot how to forget, it learned to keep. Kept in the bed. Kept in the census. Kept in the docket. Kept where numbers behave. That is the revelation at the center of the case. Not a ghost under the quilt, but an arrangement that made it desirable for a girl to remain unfinished. The institution did not erase her, it curated her. The county did not deny her, it framed her. The church did not heal her, it folded her. All of them named her in ways that let her persist without making anyone responsible for an ending. When we move to the last descent, we will not look for new evidence. We will listen to what remains when evidence is tired. The residues the room could not help collecting. The beneath fiber triplet on a blank card, the shallow etch on a drawer that warns us not to close it, the photograph that rehearses darkness and then returns to its first pale. We have heard the machine. Now we will hold the objects it left humming. Don't close the file. We arrive at the end by noticing what refuses to end. Not proof, not cure, not even story. Only residue. The small, stubborn artifacts that cling after everyone has put away their pens. These are the places we listen now, because they whisper longer than voices. The first residue lives in pulp itself. A blank card, stored with the infirmary slips, carries no ink at all. It should have been discarded, but someone preserved it between folios as if it too belonged. Under raking light, you see 3 shallow curves pressed into its surface. Not written, only pressed. A triplet of decisions not made. Kept, not kept, still recorded. The dents form no word, but they argue with each other like 3 witnesses who cannot agree yet refuse to depart. No clerk owned them, no date anchors them, and yet they hold the same shape as her life. Possibility suspended in blankness, kept without keeping. The second residue is physical, heavier. In the county museum basement, a drawer from the infirmary catalog sits in storage. The wood is plain pine, varnished thin. Inside, index cards curl like dry leaves. The cards are unremarkable. The drawer is not. When you pull it open, your fingertips feel shallow ridges across the underside. A texture cut years before the museum acquired it, etched by a hand, or by pressure, or by the slow scrape of metal over decades. The line reads, "Don't close the file." Not in ink, not in graphite, but cut into wood the way admonitions are cut into pews. No one cataloged it, but the warning waits under your hand every time you return the drawer. The third residue is the photograph. You have seen it before. Control print of the mother yellows at the edges, eats itself in the way silver salts do. The daughter's image darkens under ultraviolet, then releases, returning to its first pallor, as though time rehearsed, but never performed. The technician wrote, "Image unchanged." Impossible, and yet the print repeats its impossibility every time it is tested. Even now, the archive notes admit, no further deterioration. A likeness that refuses decay becomes more than a likeness. It becomes a participant in the same refusal that defined the bed, the ledger, the family. A photograph that does not age is not evidence. It is chorus. There are smaller residues too. The calendar pinned to 1836, preserved in a scrapbook with brittle glue that gave way long ago. The hair from her braid, tucked between 2 Bible leaves, one silver, one brown, refusing to harmonize. A faint wax stain on a deposition page, as if the seal wept after it had cooled. All are accidents of preservation. All are reminders that accidents are where systems leave their secrets. If you stack these residues together, they tell a different story than the one officials told. Officials said, confined, still processing, not aligned. Residues say, kept, not kept, still recorded. Don't close the file. Image unchanged. Residue has no incentive to flatter. It simply refuses to let time complete its work. A dent does not lie. A photograph does not perform. A drawer does not write. Yet together they insist more stubbornly than words. What was she then? A girl misplaced between states. A body half invited to life and half retained by silence. A daughter, a patient, an entry, a shadow. But also, more disturbingly, a creation of the system itself. She became what the ledgers needed, a figure that allowed them to practice patience without paying for decision. Not compatible, not aligned. Still processing. A phrase is cheaper than a cure. A stamp is gentler than a burial. A drawer is quieter than a verdict. The system discovered that forgetting her would require more work than remembering her, and so it remembered. Not with love, not with devotion, but with repetition. And repetition makes reality. We must be honest. There is no way to prove she lived 40 years in a single unbroken sleep. Some physicians called it fraud. Some neighbors called it witchcraft. Some clerks treated it as nuisance. But none could erase her from their books, and so her story remains. Whether she slept or not, The system dreamed her, and in dreaming her, it created something more enduring than her body. A myth disguised as a file that could not close, because to close it would be to admit the categories had failed. This isn't a ghost story. It's about a system that forgot how to forget. A county that found stability in hesitation. A church that found doctrine in folding. A family that found permission in paperwork. And at the center, a girl who lay down in 1836 and gave all of them the silence they required. We close with the parable Residue always demands. A room where a bed holds its shape for 40 years. A calendar that never turns. A drawer that whispers not to be shut. A photograph that rehearses darkness and then returns to light. Ask yourself, are these signs of haunting, or are they the way paper tells us what people refuse to? Systems are not cruel because they hate. They are cruel because they hold too well. Numbers that move get questioned. Numbers that hold get paid. Silence that persists gets blessed as peace. A file that refuses conclusion becomes immortal. We end where we began in Ohio, in a farmhouse no longer standing. The walls gone, the field plowed, the family names dispersed into other counties. But the file remains, humming in fragments. It will not close because too many hands decided it was easier to keep her open. Perhaps that is the truest horror. Not that she could not wake, but that no one wanted her to. Tell me where you are listening from, and what time it is. There is comfort in knowing we are scattered across the world, sitting with the same open file.